Hey folks, welcome to Moonshift Audio. I'm a huge fan of hyperpop. I love the way it takes retro sounds and influences and gives them a modern, even futuristic twist. Charli XCX is one of the front runners of this style, and I think she's writing some of the best hooks in pop at the moment. I really like some of the production work on the track Constant Repeat, so I'm going to recreate the backing track in this video. Let's take a quick look at what I'll be making. Before we get stuck in, I just want to introduce myself quickly. I'm Jack. I'm a UK-based producer and mix engineer. I put out a video like this every week, so if you enjoy it, please do like and subscribe. If you're making retro or UK dance-influenced pop music and you'd like to work with me on a project, you can get in touch with me through my website. There's a link to that down below. But for now, let's get stuck in. Okay, here we are in Cubase, and this is a reasonably big session. There's quite a few elements here, but the majority of them are actually all going into making one sound, which is the main lead sound, which sounds like this. I love this sound in the original, and it's got so much going on. It was quite challenging to recreate it. I don't think I've done it exactly, but I think I've got the thrust of it. And a huge amount of what's going on there is to do with bus processing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with one element of it, which is this nice pluck from pigments. Sounds like that. And I'm going to show you what's going on the bus. So all of these instruments, all of these ones in yellow, and I think this one as well, are all being fed to this one bus. And you can see here I've got quite a lot of processing going on. The first thing, I'm just going to bypass all of these effects, and I'm going to start at the end where I'm using a Pro Q to absolutely rip out all the low end, put a load of sparkle in. So you're going to hear this is a lot more full now. And when I put the EQ in, I add in elements later on to fill out the mid-range and the low end of the spectrum, but this pluck is almost all in the upper mids and highs. So by putting this quite drastic EQ at the end of the chain here, everything that goes to that bus is going to be scooped in the way that I want it, and I don't have to worry about EQing all of the individual elements too much. So we can now start to go through this processing chain in a slightly more logical order. So first of all, I've got the Brigade chorus, which is a lovely chorus from UAD. Widens it a lot, adding a bit of modulation. Then we've got Shaper Box. Now I'm using two different shapers here. Both of them are on a 8th note, simple downward ramp. So I've got a volume. If I turn off the filter and the volume, you can just hear, I'm only putting the mix at 50%. But it's just giving a little bit of a pluck on the doot, 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 doot. Similarly, the filter is doing exactly the same thing. So I'm just doing a nice saw shape LFO on that cutoff. Just making the whole thing a bit more percussive. Thickening it up next with an Echo Boy on 8th notes as well, on the wide setting. Just gives it a little bit of a wash and some depth and space to it. Next up, Supermassive from Valhalla. Free plugin, absolutely excellent. And this is effectively another quite complex delay. Okay, so the last plugin in the chain before that final EQ is a stereo enhancer. This is a stock effect from Cubase, but you could use any stereo enhancer to do this. And I'm using this as an automatable effect to blow open the stereo image at various points in the mix. So this main pluck that's present almost the entire way through can actually sort of bloom and develop and give the track a sense of impact, a sense of dynamics. I'll play it to start with and everything's in mono. But it's worth mentioning that all of this is getting sent to a reverb where there is a very simple little plate with a 2-second decay and also a stereo enhancer. So the stereo information that you can hear at this point is coming from that reverb. And you'll see here, this is going from mono to fully wide. And you can hear that suddenly fill the stereo image. So now we know what's going on the bus, let's look at the other elements that I've added to this. I've got another pluck. This one's a bit more washy. It's from Serum. Slightly lower timbre. It's a bit more static than that other pad. I've got a kind of organ. I'm going to skip the guitar for now. Let's just listen to this other pluck. You can see I'm automating the cutoff to get a slightly building sensation. And automating the resonance as well. There's this organ. I'll pull the guitar down here because these 4 elements are basically what make up the pluck. So I'm going to solo all 4 of these and we can hear how these work together. The other elements that go into this sort of pluck group are a muted guitar sound, which is just from Hallion, the stock Cubase sampler. A nice organ, which is coming from Serum, and a sort of lead guitar, which I'm actually getting from Pigments, this Miami Guitar Nights patch. I'm pretty sure the original has got some live guitar played, which sounds great. So if we put all that together, we've got this really nice, quite intricate and textured sound. And by bringing in and out the different elements that make it up, we can have a really nice dynamic, but still maintaining that nice rhythmic and spacious quality that's being provided by all the processing that we're doing on the bus there. The last element coming in here is this voice synth, which is a copy of a voice synth that comes in as part of the intro. So I'm going to unsolo the plucks now and we can look at the remaining elements from this intro. There's a muted guitar here that fades in towards the end of the first 8 bars. Sounds pretty dry, but we add it to another layer here. And in the context of the mix, I'm just going to mute the voice synth for a second. It does add something. It's quite subtle. Just adding a little bit of extra rhythm. You can see as we open up the filters and we're adding these extra layers, there's an unfiltered pluck here. This is quite an important element to this track. It's a nice trancey pluck, and because it doesn't go to that group, it's much, much fuller. And it's this filter cut off with a bit of a resonance build as well that gives part of that big build into the drop. We've got a nice synthetic voice patch from Pigments here, which I actually made myself using a few different sample engines to get this really kind of like old school, pitchy, kind of warbly vocal element that they have in the original. And there's a riser. Let's just hear all of that together and we'll actually let it drop into the verse at this point. Okay, so with the pluck sound taken care of, that voice synth, the unfiltered pluck as well, we've basically got most of the main melodic elements taken care of. So now it's just the kind of meat of the track, which is the drums and the bass. Okay, so you can see the drum pattern here, and it is super, super basic. It basically rolls right the way through the track. I've got a kick, a snare, and a clap. A steady 8th note hi-hat does come in right at the end, but that's kind of it. I'll pull up the battery here so you can see what's gone into it. This is a kick drum that's come from the stock battery sound bank. These other kicks I never used in the end. I've got a snare, which is a kind of trap style snare, and a clap, which is basically, sounds a lot like an 808 clap to me. Again, that's from the battery stock sound bank. The hi-hat that comes in later I took from a 606. And there's a classic 909 crash. And a 909 snare that we use for a build later on. It's worth mentioning that obviously I'm producing an instrumental here, and from this stage on, when the vocal comes in, it is all about Charli's enormous lead vocal on this. So there isn't a huge amount of crazy stuff going on in the backing track. So there isn't a huge amount of really interesting and detailed stuff going on in the backing track. It's mostly just exactly that, a backing track for that vocal to sit on. But let's solo the kick. You can see I've just got a classic 1176. Just bringing out the meat in the tail of that drum. I've got a Pro Q3, which is scooping out some of the mids, adding a bit of click back in and just a little bit of the fundamental. And a bit of decap, just to give it a little bit of extra drive. Just helps it cut through the mix a bit. Snare, putting some body in, taking out some harshness. Just a bit too shrill, I was finding, especially when it's layered with the clap. Also, again, you find I put a little bit of drive on a lot of my drums, just helps to give them some presence without having to turn them up too loud. I'll have a look at the clap. Similar to the snare, we're putting some low end. I wanted the weight and not the harshness. If we listen to the clap and snare together, just gets quite fatiguing after a while, that sort of 8K area. Hi-hat, no processing at all. Crash, probably just scooping out the lows. Yep, there we go. The snare build up. Just again, I'm trying to avoid that kind of like high-end build up. So listening to the drums as a whole, let's skip in a bit and we can hear where the hat comes in. Super simple, but that enormous kick really slaps. I think it's time to look at the bass. Got two different basses in this production. There's a square wave bass that I took from the stock Serum presets. What you hear in the verse sounds like this. Really filthy. I'm compressing it. Just to help take off a little bit from the peaks when each note hits. Roughing it up with a decapitator. Just adding that a little bit of a buzz there. Help it cut through, give it some raw energy. then I'm taking quite a lot out of this with a Pro Q3, and a lot of this is to do with how it interacts with the kick drum. We've got a very big bass that's just playing solid long notes and a pretty enormous kick drum as well, so there's always going to be a little bit of work involved in getting these to fit around each other. But first of all, I'll just quickly play you what happens if I turn off these other bands. You can hear I'm just pulling it back, taking some of the presence out, again, to make room for that lead vocal that would be sitting there. This band here at 95 Hertz is all about the kick drum though. I'm going to solo the kick and I'm going to solo the bass. And I'll turn off this cut here. It starts to get quite muddy, but also the kick is now completely masked. It just sounds really clicky and weak. And that's just giving it the space it needs to really boom through. This one here is just to complement that band, that cut, just to make it a little bit sharper. The relationship between the kick drum and the bass is not yet over. I've also got an instance of soothe here, and this is giving a bit of transparent, this is side chained from the kick, as we'll see. Just giving it all a little bit of space. It's kind of game of inches, this. By sucking those frequencies out of the bass when the kick hits, we can get quite a transparent way of making space for them both in that low end part of the mix. A slightly less transparent way of doing this is with a full bandwidth compressor. Again, side chained, but I'm doing something a little bit sneaky with this, and I'm not actually side chaining it from the kick drum. What I've got here, if I just bring this up, is a hi-hat. Just turn it up. Now I've set that hi-hat up to play whenever the kick is triggered, that hi-hat gets triggered as well. I'm fading it right out, I don't want to hear it in the mix, but rather than trying to use the kick as a sidechain source for this compressor, I'm using that hi-hat. And the reason being is because that kick's got quite a long decay on it, and it means that the compressor doesn't have time to recover between the hits. Whereas with a really short snappy sound like a hi-hat as a trigger, you can see this blue graph here is when that sidechain signal is present. It barely flashes and it's gone. And that means that I can set the release as short and snappy as I want. And actually I want it to hear, you can hear in the original, the bass is audibly pumping around that kick drum. It's not like a kind of sidechain trance track, it's just a snappy duck when the kick hits, and it gives the whole track this really nice sort of swing. It also helps make more room for the kick, so it's a win-win. I'll just bypass this. Lovely. I think the only other thing to mention in this verse section is this impact, which is literally just the sound I got off Splice. Basically a kind of kick bomb. It's kind of over the top, but this is Charli, so we'll roll with it. Moving into the pre-chorus now. So we drop out the drums. We drop out the unfiltered pluck. So we're kind of getting back into almost like the same instrumentation that was there in the intro. The only thing that's changing is the bass. Now we drop out the square wave bass and we put in this super saw style bass. This is so simple. I made this patch in a couple of minutes in Serum. It's just a low passed double oscillator super saw. It plays the exact same notes that the original bass did, and you can see I'm just automating that filter cutoff to help us get that build. Processing wise, we've got the same issue here that we want this to fit around the kick, so I've got an identical cut at 90 Hertz, and I'm scooping out some of the mud and lower mid-range there. So I'll just turn off these so you can hear what I'm getting rid of. That kind of growl is starting to get a bit obnoxious in the mix. And now I'll bring in the kick, and you'll hear we're just getting rid of all that masking by putting this nice cut here. On from there, here's a nice trick for you. Multi-band stereo imaging. Now, Serum by default, love it or hate it. When you start to put you can change this, but when you start to put the unison up on these oscillators, they are spread left to right in the stereo field, which means you get these amazing wide saws and pads, which is fantastic. But for anything that you think might get played in a club or similar space, you really want your low end to be in mono. So you could use a stereo imager just to take all the stereo information out of that, but then you lose the lovely width. So all I'm doing here is I've put this is part of Isotope Ozone, and I'm putting a crossover here about 100 Hertz. So everything in band 1 below 100 Hertz is mono, like width minus 100, and everything in band 2 is left untouched. If you're not listening on a big system, this might not be that easy to hear if I bypass. It's just helping to keep that very low end nicely tight and controlled in the middle there. I've got a multi-band compressor next, and what I'm using this for is just to compress the very sub frequencies. The way that these super saws kind of play around each other, the different saw shapes, can mean that you get some inconsistencies in volume, which is fine, but in the low end it can start to feel a bit weird. So just by a little bit of extra compression, it just helps to keep that all a bit more solid down in the bottom end. Following that, at the end of the chain, I'm pulling the exact same two tricks I used on the verse bass. I've got an instance of Soothe, side chain from the kick, which is just helping to give a nice transparent bit of space around that bass for the kick drum to sit in. And then a slightly less transparent way of ducking the bass in a noticeable way, using that same hi-hat as a trigger for this compressor here. Just helps the whole track bump a bit. So that's the bass. Let's hear from the pre-chorus going into the chorus with that super saw bass. Again, a riser. And we get that nice drop back to the verse, much more restrained bass. The stereo image is sucked right in again. And now we're into the build up, raising up the filter on that bass, and this is where we've got that nice 909 snare and crash roll. Lovely bit of over the top 90s cheese. Back to the chorus. And there's a nice flourish here as we come into the outro. I love things like that. So we drop out basically everything, bass included, leaving only that original pluck from the very intro, and then we bring everything back in so it just all slams in. Really nice way to just add a little bit of an upset to anyone who's listening or on the dance floor. You're really going to feel that. There you go, that's my recreation of Constant Repeat by Charli XCX. Okay folks, thanks for watching. If you found this video useful, please do like and subscribe for more tips, tricks, resources and downloads from me at Moonshift Audio. Till next time.